5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve. When the house caught fire in the middle of the night, their parents and 4 siblings escaped. They did not. The fire department arrived hours later. They searched the ashes. There were no bodies, no bones, no remains, nothing. 5 children, aged 5 to 14, had apparently burned so completely that not a single fragment of them was left behind. Except the fire chief himself said that wasn't possible. He expected to find remains. There were none. So where did they go? This case is almost 80 years old. It has never been solved. And depending on which version of the evidence you believe, either 5 children perished in a house fire on Christmas Eve 1945, or 5 children were taken from that house before the fire was started, and the fire was set to cover it up. Both versions of this case are disturbing. Only one of them involves a crime, and the family, what remained of it, spent the rest of their lives convinced it was the second one. Let me take you back to Fayetteville, West Virginia, to a family named Sodder, and to a night that changed everything. If you want to follow cases like this one, subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries right now. Turn on notifications, hit the like button. We cover the cases that deserve more than a headline. Now let's get into it. George Sodder was born in Sardinia, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the United States at 13 years old alongside an older brother, who then turned around and went back to Italy, leaving George alone in a country he didn't know. George never talked about why he left Italy. He just stayed. He adapted. He worked on railroads. He became a truck driver. Eventually, he built his own hauling company. In Smithers, West Virginia, he met Jenny Cipriani. They married. They moved to Fayetteville, to a 2-story timber-framed house about 3 kilometers north of town. Over the years, they had 10 children. George was prosperous. He was respected. He was also outspoken, sometimes uncomfortably so. He had strong opinions about fascism and about Benito Mussolini. He argued about it publicly. He made enemies over it. That detail matters. We will come back to it. In October 1945, 2 months before the fire, a life insurance salesman came to the Sodder house. George declined the offer, and the salesman said something that stopped George cold. He told George that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. George asked why he would say something like that. The salesman said it was because of the dirty remarks George had been making about Mussolini. George reported this to the police. But here's where it gets strange. Around the same time, a different stranger approached George and commented on the pair of fuse boxes on the property. He said they would cause a fire someday. George found this odd. He had just had the house rewired and inspected by an electrician. He had the wiring checked again after this comment. The electrician told him everything was in perfect working order. And then, in the days before Christmas, the eldest Sodder boys noticed something while walking home from school. An unfamiliar car was parked nearby. The people inside were watching them. Does that feel like coincidence to you? Because 3 separate, unprovoked warnings, all pointing to fire, all connected to George's political views, in the 2 months before his house burned down? That is a lot of coincidence to absorb. But nothing was done, no investigation, no protection. And Christmas Eve came. George and Jenny spent the evening with 9 of their 10 children. Their son Joe had been drafted into the army. As the night wore on, George and the older boys, John, 23, and George Jr., 16, went to bed. The younger children begged Jenny to stay up a little longer. Jenny's 17-year-old sister Marion had bought them new toys, and they weren't ready to sleep. Jenny agreed, as long as they finished their chores first. Jenny eventually went to bed herself, taking 3-year-old Sylvia with her. Shortly after midnight, the phone rang. Jenny answered. On the other end was a woman's voice she didn't recognize, with what Jenny later described as a strange laugh. Jenny hung up. She assumed it was a wrong number or a prank call. She checked on the children. Marion was asleep on the couch. But something was off. The lights were still on and all the doors were unlocked. That wasn't normal for that household. Jenny turned off the lights, locked the doors, and went back to bed. And then she heard something. A loud bang on the roof, followed by the sound of something rolling. She didn't think much of it. At 1:30 in the morning, she woke to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. Jenny screamed. Her husband George, their son John, George Jr., and little Sylvia made it out of the house. 5 children did not. Maurice, 14. Martha, 12. Louis, 9. Jenny, 8. Betty, 5. George ran back. He tried everything he could think of. He climbed the wall to the attic. He cut his hands, breaking a window, trying to get through. He looked for the ladder that was always propped against the side of the house. It was gone. A water barrel that could have helped extinguish the flames, frozen solid. His trucks, both of which had worked the day before, would not start. Either of them. Marion ran to alert the police, but the phone line was dead. It appeared to have been cut. She ran to a neighbor's house. A driver on a nearby road also saw the flames and tried to call from a local tavern. The call didn't connect. By the time emergency services were eventually reached, through one of those 2 sources, it was already too late. The fire department arrived hours later. The house was already ash. What would you think if you were George Sodder, standing outside watching your home burn, and every single thing that could have helped you save those children had been removed or disabled? The ladder, the trucks, the phone line, the water, all of it, gone. Before we get into what the fire left behind, or, more accurately, what it didn't, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries. Cases like this one have been waiting decades for the attention they deserve. Every subscriber helps this channel cover them. Now let's talk about the ashes. When investigators searched the remains of the Sodder house, they found something that stopped the fire chief in his tracks. No bones, not fragments, not partial remains, not charred skeletal material, nothing. 5 children, ranging in age from 5 to 14, had apparently been consumed so completely by the fire that not a single identifiable piece of them remained. The fire chief said publicly that he would have expected to find some form of remains. There were none. Here is why that matters. Human bones do not simply disappear in a house fire. Even cremation, which uses temperatures far higher than a typical structure fire and is specifically designed to reduce remains, leaves behind bone fragments. Forensic anthropologists can identify remains from fires that are far more intense than a residential blaze. Jenny Sodder was so desperate for answers that she burned animal bones herself, trying to understand if fire alone could explain the absence. It couldn't. Now, one account complicates this. Some sources say that internal organs and skeletal fragments were found in the basement, but that authorities kept this information from George and Jenny. If that is true, it raises its own questions about why it was hidden from the family. But here's what makes the official conclusion so difficult to accept. The coroner ruled the fire was caused by faulty wiring, the same wiring that had been inspected twice in the weeks before and declared safe both times. And among the jury at the coroner's inquest, the man who had told George his children would be destroyed in retribution for his anti-Mussolini remarks. That man helped determine the official cause of death of the 5 children who he had threatened. Let that settle for a moment. 4 days after the fire, Jenny and George couldn't bear to look at the site any longer. George bulldozed it and built a memorial in its place. In the years that followed, the family's own investigation turned up details that only deepened the questions. The ladder that had vanished on the night of the fire was eventually found on an embankment 75 feet away from the house. It had been moved. Someone had moved it. A man who had been arrested for stealing from the Sodder property around the time of the fire admitted to cutting the phone wire that night. He believed he had cut the power line. But Jenny pointed out something chilling. If the power line had been cut, the family would never have survived. The lights were on when she went back to sleep that night. The phone line was cut, not the power. Someone knew exactly which wire to cut. And the late phone call Jenny received just after midnight? It was eventually confirmed as a genuine mistake, a wrong number. But its timing, in the window before the fire started, keeping Jenny awake and checking on the house, has never stopped feeling significant to the family. Think about the picture this paints. A ladder moved 75 feet away, 2 trucks that worked the day before and wouldn't start, a phone line cut, a water barrel frozen, 5 children with no physical remains. Either this was the most catastrophically unlucky night in the history of West Virginia, or someone prepared for it. For years, George drove across the state following every lead, every tip, every sighting. He kept a billboard on State Route 16, photographs of his 5 missing children, and a $10,000 reward for information. That billboard stood for decades, and in 1967, 22 years after the fire, the family received a photograph in the mail. It showed a man who appeared to be in his 20s or 30s. George and Jenny believed it was Louis. Their Louis, the 9-year-old, who had not come out of that house. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie." A string of numbers followed. Their meaning was never decoded. The family hired a private investigator to travel to the city they believed the photograph had been sent from. He was never heard from again. He could not be located. George Sodder died in 1969, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny tended the memorial garden every day until her death in 1989. She wore black mourning clothes every day of those 44 years. When she died, the billboard came down. There are 2 versions of what happened on Christmas Eve 1945. The first is the official version. The fire was caused by faulty wiring. 5 children perished. Their remains were consumed by the fire or were minimal and scattered. The family, unable to accept the truth, spent decades in grief-driven denial. The second version is what the Sodder family and many researchers believe, that George's outspoken views had earned him real enemies. People connected, possibly, to organized crime or to those who had backed Mussolini. That the warnings he received in the months before, the insurance salesman's threat, the comment about the fuse boxes, the strange car watching the children, were not coincidences. That someone removed the ladder, disabled the trucks, cut the phone line, and either set the fire or used an existing fire to cover the removal of 5 children from that house. And that the 5 missing Sodder children did not die that night. That they were taken. The surviving Sodder children and their families have campaigned for this version for decades. They point to the missing remains. They point to the photograph of a man they believed was Louis. They point to the private investigator who disappeared. And they point to the fact that the man who threatened George's family sat on the jury that ruled the fire an accident. What do you think? Is this a family unable to accept grief, or is it a family that saw something real and was never believed? Maurice was 14. Martha was 12. Louis was 9. Jenny was 8. Betty was 5. They went to bed on Christmas Eve excited about new toys their aunt had bought them. And they never woke up. Or they woke up somewhere else, in a car, in a house, in a life they hadn't chosen, with a family who never stopped looking for them. We don't know which of those things is true. We may never know. What we know is that George Sodder spent his life following every lead. Jenny wore black for 44 years. The billboard stood on Route 16 for decades, with 5 faces, and a question nobody ever answered. And the private investigator who might have been getting close to something, he vanished too. Cases like this don't just become history. They become the thing a family carries every Christmas, every year, for the rest of their lives. Let me know in the comments what you think happened to the Sodder children. This is one of the most debated cases in American history, and the conversation is still very much alive. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. These stories matter. I'm Marcus Webb. Thank you for watching.